Hi, my name is Kevin Jones, and this is the introduction chapter to the Using Git Flow class from Pluralsight. So in this chapter, we'll take a look at Git Flow and at what Git Flow actually is. We'll install Git Flow, and we'll see what we need to do to install it on different platforms. We also need to initialize Git Flow. So before we first use it, after setting up our Git repository, we have to ready that Git repository to use Git Flow, and we'll see how we do that. However, before we do any of those things, we'll take a look at some other Git branching models. And we'll do this so we can compare Git Flow to these models and see what benefits Git Flow brings us, or maybe what benefits these other models bring us. This class assumes you already know Git. If you don't, Pluralsight offers some other Git classes. There's a Git Fundamentals class, there's an Introduction to Git class, and there's also an Advanced Git class. And if you don't know Git, you might want to look at one of those other classes before you continue with this one. So as well as Git Flow, there are other well-known Git branching models. So for example, there's a model called the centralized model, where we keep everything on a centralized server. There's the feature branch model, where each developer creates their own branch for the work they're currently doing. There's also Git Flow, which we'll take a look at in this class. And there are others as well. So GitHub, for example, introduces their own model for managing Git. In the centralized model, we have one centralized repository. End users simply clone that repository, and they pull all their changes from that central repository to their local machine. Any changes they make are saved locally, and then those local changes are pushed back to the central repository. So in effect, everybody's working on the same repository and on one branch within that repository. If you've ever used something like SVN or CVS, then this model is very similar to that. In those source control systems, branching was very expensive. So people tended to work on a single branch on a single central repository, and that's what this branching model mimics. And it works something like this. We have a central repository, somebody comes along and makes a change to that repository. We might pull the repository to our local machine, make changes to it, and then push those local changes back to the central repository. But there's only one repository and only one branch on that repository. And this is a very simple model. If you're working with small teams or maybe just working on your own, then this model is perfectly acceptable. Another common model is something called the feature branch model. In the feature branch model, we have a central repository, and people still make changes to this repository. So changes are merged back onto one branch in this repository. However, for any feature you're working on, any changes you want to make to your code, you create what's known as a feature branch. So you might do a git checkout -b to say switch to a branch and give this branch a name. In this case, we call it my feature. You make changes to that branch. In the meantime, other changes are being pushed back to the central repository. Eventually your feature is finished and you want to merge that feature back into the central repository. This is the benefit of being reasonably simple. It also the benefit of keeping your changes isolated from other developers, so any changes they might be making, until they are ready to get pushed and merged back into one central repository. So now that we've seen these two fairly common approaches to Git and using Git, we'll now take a look at Git Flow.